The Last of Us 2 shows no game is untouchable. It is the 16th of June as I write this script, and I am eagerly awaiting my copy of the game and fully intend to review it fairly and critically as I have done other games on this channel. This video, for me, and I hope for you, serves as a preface to that review. This video serves as an opinion that only works for as long as the game isn't out on the market. These are the last few days until everyone can see for themselves whether or not The Last of Us 2 is a commercial success or failure. Whether those leaks really indicated a ruined story, or whether people just didn't want to give it a shot. Whether the glowing review outlets will stand as an example of corruption, being bought out for good scores, or whether they will actually end up being a voice for reason that a game can be really good, even when the leaks seem supremely bad. It is all too easy to get swept up in a movement and lose sight of objectivity. For someone like me, who follows video game news and likes to analyze game design, this is a really interesting time, and I feel this may well be the very first time gaming has ever been in a situation where an untouchable franchise suddenly became vulnerable. This might be the first and the last time that a bastion of gaming ended up becoming the villain, whether it deserved it or not. To comprehensively display why this is such a unique time, the reputation of the original game has to be established for all three of you who haven't played it yet. The way I look at The Last of Us, the original, is that it is a unique achievement. There have been many games before it and after it that tried to tell a properly grounded story which meshed well with its gameplay mechanics, with the presentation quality to make it all click. But in my opinion, no other game has achieved what The Last of Us did. Think about it. What other game has such believable grounded dialogue, a world filled with realistic humans, such believable character progression, mechanics that are in line with the story the game tries to tell, and the presentation quality to show all of the tiniest of emotions so that every scene just hits? A story that impacts the world in a grand way, but yet the characters are so very subtle, and the way that they experience the story is on such a small scale. There is no story beat in The Last of Us we haven't seen before in movies, but I feel that we have never seen them executed at this level in a game before. Final Fantasy always had great overarching stories, but the characters were always more anime inspired, greater than life, and the dialogue had cheese to fit those characters, and also very troublesome localizations. Metal Gear is famous for its complex narrative, but by the time Metal Gear Solid 4 came out, its appeal was for a very specific audience. Metal Gear's story became famous as multiple games released, not straight out of the gate. It was also heavily hindered by the limited technology at the time. The original God of War, meanwhile, did a great job of realizing a Greek tragedy, but it really isn't on the same level in dialogue, character development, or presentation. Meanwhile, the 2018 incarnation of God of War, possibly the second closest contender, was heavily inspired by The Last of Us itself. In a weird way, while nothing about The Last of Us was new, the quality of the final product and the commitment to telling a grounded story within a unique world has never been done before. It is completely original, in spite of its components being entirely unoriginal. As a result of this, I, and millions of other gamers, still look at The Last of Us as the crowning achievement of Naughty Dog. It is the single best PlayStation 3 game, and even now, 7 years after release, it still stands head and shoulders next to its most modern peers, without even a hint of slowing down. What other game does such a good mix of its storytelling and its mechanics to prevent any kind of ludonarrative dissonance? Really, I cannot think of any. Don't get me wrong, the game isn't perfect. I don't want to give that impression. The AI of your allies was wonky at times, and Naughty Dog realized this, hence why enemies cannot spot them. This in turn created some very immersion-breaking moments when enemies wouldn't see your allies even though they stood right in their faces. But from another perspective, what other game did allies better in 2013? Or even since then? Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite comes to mind, but she was quite brain dead. There was no moment where the AI had to go into stealth based on the actions of the player. You either fought or you didn't. That was it. The rift mechanic was also predetermined in what you could summon and where. Boy, I mean Atreus from God of War, comes to mind secondly. He was very useful and well implemented, but in this game too, you were either in combat or you weren't. That was it. Companions in games are usually binary. They fight or they don't. In The Last of Us, the AI had to adapt on the fly, going in and out of stealth based on the actions of you, the player, all while performing the standard set of supporting actions when you did end up in combat. This also had animations to boot, where the AI would actually hide under the shoulder of Joel to make sure that everything looked coherent. The AI also often subtly brought you to places for optional dialogue that added to the character relationships. All of these tiny details must have been hell to program, but I think that the ally AI in The Last of Us was fine, in spite of its obvious flaws. Enemy AI wasn't exactly smart either. They were rather basic in their behavior, but considering the lethality of combat encounters in The Last of Us, I think it was tolerable. I think most people are willing to overlook those flaws on limited hardware such as the PlayStation 3, because the quality of everything else was so unmatched. This would explain why this game has such an unmatched reputation. And so the announcement of the second game rightfully got a lot of hype, and very high expectations. Everything about the sequel seemed to go well. Neil was back, and so was the original cast. The graphics of the reveal footage almost seemed too good to be on PlayStation 4. The tone of the story was as dark as ever. No compromises were made, and Neil promised everyone he would do right by us. And then it all turned around.
I know you wish things were different. I wish things were different. Ellie! But they ain't.
Leaks, crunch, Anita Sarkeesian's involvement, Naughty Dog trying to perform damage control and getting ridiculed for it, the absolute commitment to perfection that caused delays. Everything Naughty Dog had done so right started working against them, and in the span of a few weeks, the reputation of The Last of Us derailed harder than the train from Call of Duty World War II. The sheer amount of dislike for everything related to the game and studio is unmatched. Not even Call of Duty built up this much hate with one game. It took them about a decade to get to Infinite Warfare. It's honestly impressive. We are now in a situation where the sequel's getting glowing reviews, just like the first game. But people aren't buying it. No matter the sheer amount of positive reviews, people's opinions on the game have been so set in stone that they will go out of their way to say Naughty Dog paid off every single reviewer. So what gives? Why didn't this happen with Part 1 or other AAA games in general? The big difference? Twists of the sequel got leaked months ago. And not only did they leak, but these twists were key events that many people disagreed with. These story choices by Naughty Dog caused a stir among fans, because we loved the characters of the first game, and whether consciously or not, we want to see a happy ending. I think this is best reflected by the sheer volume of people labeling the twists as fan fiction. But Naughty Dog is keen to remind us all that the world of The Last of Us isn't a happy one, and dark twists and turns aren't something that only happens in fanfictions. Already from the very first game we should have known. Bad things happen, and people do bad things in return. We've been warned by Neil from the very start that this game was about hate.
Yeah, if the first game was really like the core of it, the theme was about the love between these two characters and how we build that through story, music, interaction, gameplay, mechanics. This story is the counter of that. The story is about hate and how we use all those same things to make the player feel that through Ellie this time. First game is like you play as Joel, this game you're playing as Ellie.
How ironic is it then that the twists that leaked ended up causing people to hate the sequel without even having played it? By the time you watch this video, things might have changed, but at the time of recording, almost every professional reviewing outlet that gives The Last of Us Part 2 a positive or glowing score gets disliked bombed. It is a wholly unique and for me riveting situation to see reviewers and the general gaming community stand so opposite of one another. One side played the game and praises it, the other refers to the leaks, Naughty Dog's bad crunch culture, Ellie being lesbian, and the way Naughty Dog handled its social media presence lately, all of which fuels a dislike for the company and with it their newest product. If I can refer any one of you to a hugely interesting video, I'd like to do so now. Please watch Robin Gaming's video on Naughty Dog's hidden agenda, and I think it will perfectly clarify why people are unhappy with Naughty Dog and how it has changed. Their commitment to inclusiveness and diversity has led to certain studio choices that feel wrong, forced, and out of place on social media, and there is a rightful worry that this commitment will negatively affect the games Naughty Dog will make in the future, including The Last of Us Part 2. The reveal that Anita Sarkeesian was involved with The Last of Us Part 2 seemed to be the turning point that proved this worry to be true. It is certainly a compelling thought. Considering her controversial and frankly problematic history, she isn't a gamer, never was. Various quotes of her beliefs are also heavily unresearched, generalized statements that are often more damaging than they are helpful. Well, this proves the point of the community then. Everything is settled. Naughty Dog is the problem. But I don't believe that is quite right. When I look at and listen to what Naughty Dog said about their cooperation with Anita Sarkeesian, it seems to me that she mostly functions to ask Naughty Dog the following question during the development of The Last of Us Part 2. What if it was a girl? And here, I think that for once, Anita Sarkeesian hit the nail on the head with a question that developers should be asking themselves more. I am not someone who thinks actively being part of the LGBT community is a must. I also do not support modern feminism, at least the way it is portrayed these days. But I am a big advocate of equality and equity. I do think that a good, well-told story should be able to stand on its own, whether the main character is male or female, or anything in between. A good story doesn't rely on gender to carry it, and so it fits perfectly well into what The Last of Us is trying to deliver, a grounded story. Character actions have to make sense for the world that they are in, and in relation to the other characters that inhabit that world. I think it is for this reason that a realistic world like The Last of Us must have people that speak and behave realistically and consistently with their character traits. How would people behave in a post-apocalyptic world where you have to fight every single day just to get by? One where people get desperate for resources because there are so few to go around. I think that most of you would agree that the gender divide really wouldn't be that much of a thing in such a world. There are other more pressing priorities to make sure the remaining survivors can live to see another day. And so seeing Naughty Dog choose to make the females in The Last of Us Part 2 more masculine makes sense. These girls, especially the ones from particularly rough circumstances, would have to train more to defend themselves. There isn't much time or room for makeup or fashion. Ellie seems to be one of the lucky few who get to live in a town that seems remotely comparable to what we get to experience as daily life. And we all know that they had to go through hell just to get electricity. It makes it hard to imagine what other survivors had to go through who weren't as fortunate. And yes, it feels very weird to call Ellie fortunate at all, but that is the reality of the world Naughty Dog created. And speaking of Ellie, she already showed lesbian tendencies since the very first game. It was applauded then, and I find it rather ignorant to complain about something that should be normal now. Of course, you are entirely in your right to not want to see lesbian kisses, but do not act like it is surprising or out of place in a character-driven story like The Last of Us. For as much as these characters struggle, it is love that helps them see through to another day. It is an essential theme in explaining and establishing how these people don't go batshit crazy in spite of all of the bad that surrounds them. Tough lives make people less forgiving, and so revenge seems to be the natural consequence, especially with how much Ellie and Joel value one another in spite of the difficult ending of Part 1. they would go out of their way to right any wrongs done to either of them. So Part 2 being a revenge tale does feel like the most organic and natural way to progress the story. The point I am trying to make with this train of thought, and this video in general, is that the development and narrative choices made for The Last of Us Part 2 really aren't that bad. In fact, I'd call them coherent and organic as a continuation of the first game. At least on paper, these choices should make sense. It is up to the game to make them feel organic, and for that you need to build context and character progression, parts of the game that conveniently didn't leak early. Note that this is completely in reference to the story, characters, and world of the game, not the studio. I think that the crunch culture found at Naughty Dog is abhorrent, and it is unacceptable. But I also think that studio issues shouldn't affect a review score, which is intended to rate the game. During the writing process of this script, Alana Pierce made a video about the review processes at IGN. In it, she speaks of how IGN isn't afraid to disappoint publishers. IGN is afraid of the backlash from fans.
But because they want to hear that it's good, when I say it's bad, they're going to fucking hate me. Therein lies a complicated issue with covering any kind of fan media as your job in any critical way. Saying that I thought Mass Effect Andromeda was going to be bad, again at a point in time where it seemed like the whole world thought it was going to be good, meant that I did get a lot of shit on the internet for a long time. But point being, I knew people didn't want to hear it, just like I know people don't really want to hear what I'm saying in this video. And it would be a lot easier for me to tell you that games journalists are corrupt and paid off, because that's what you want to hear. That would get me a lot of positive comments, and it would get me a lot of subscribers, and it would be shared, it would get a lot of views. That is the thing that would put me in good favor with the internet, and I am aware of that. But that is not the truth. There is nuance to that, and I'm going to get into it here.
It is weird to imagine a world without the leaks and how we would have looked at The Last of Us Part 2 now in that world. Would it still get as much hate? I think if we consider that scenario realistically, people would have gone into the game with a much more open mind to experience for themselves whether Part 2 is a masterpiece or a failure. You may not like the twists and turns, but then again, playing the game with an open mind may just as well convince many of you to appreciate those very same twists and turns, if not more. Context matters, and it really does not get said frequently enough. I strongly believe in creative freedom, and that even the most extreme turns of events are acceptable, as long as the narrative has that world and characters build up to that point in a believable way. It is also with this in mind that I intend to experience The Last of Us 2 with as much of an open mind as I can have. I'll let my feelings and thoughts after its completion decide whether I like it or not. Perhaps I'll end up entirely indifferent towards it. Whatever the case may be, I think this is a shot that all games deserve. Especially one that hundreds if not thousands of people put their all into for many years. The game might not be up to the standard of the first game, I don't expect it to be as novel at least, but it is weird to think the current hate train won't even let the game take a shot at it, even though the game isn't even out yet. It's unfair, and in my opinion somewhat naive, to let leaks ruin a game for you. To have them set your opinion in stone, and so you promote your beliefs to others, doing your very best to spoil the game for as many people as possible. It isn't funny or clever, it's just petty really. What I'm asking of people, also of those completely opposite to the haters, those who would defend The Last of Us Part 2 with all of their hearts, is to just take a step back and chill. None of us have played the game, go in there with an open mind, and if you're not that interested in the game, watch somebody else play through it. Let the actual game define its own reputation based on its own merits, not leaks and a studio with internal problems. Thank you for listening. I had to get my thoughts out in a video because I feel the gaming medium as a whole has been showing itself from its worst side these past few weeks. The amount of naivete and childish behavior is out of control, and people are outing their frustration with real industry issues in the wrong ways. Naughty Dog has problems, but review bombing their product isn't the solution. Besides, we know full well that Naughty Dog's crunch and LGBT agenda aren't the main reasons why this hate train started. They are merely side stories to the floodgates that got opened by the leaks. I will try to have my complete review of The Last of Us 2 ready as soon as I feel I have experienced all there is to the game. Much like my Final Fantasy VII and Doom video, I will be critical. so you can expect a comprehensive video, much like those. Don't forget to subscribe.